Lupe Pena de Martinez's roots trace back to the picturesque town of San Diego de Alejandría in Jalisco, Mexico. In July of 1998, she embraced a new chapter in her life as an Arkansan, having previously called Escondido, California home. Alongside her husband, Adelzo, a proud Belizean native, they've woven together a beautifully blended family tapestry. In her illustrious 19-year journey in education, Lupe's impact has been nothing short of remarkable. Currently, she holds the distinguished position of Director of Student Support Services, a testament to her unwavering dedication to the growth and development of every student under her care. Prior to this role, Lupe steered the ship as the principal of East End Middle School within the Sheridan School District, leaving an indelible mark on leadership. Away from the hallowed halls of education, Lupe finds solace in a cherished activity, providing English-Spanish interpretation services on a voluntary basis. Her heart also swells with joy, especially during the Salvation Army's annual Angel Tree Project, where she pays forward the immeasurable kindness that once graced her own family's journey to this country. For Lupe, this act of service is both a responsibility and a privilege, a living testament to her belief in the power of community and the boundless potential of giving back. Please welcome Lupe Pena de Martinez.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. So let's get started. Everyone, please stand up, because any educator knows the brain can only take as much as the tush must endure. So everyone go ahead and give yourself a good stretch, and I will try to make this as painless as possible. So here we go. She says painless. Don't sit down quite yet. Hold on. It's pop quiz time, everyone. You ready? Nick, where are you? Thanks for priming them for me. All right. Pop quiz time. When I ask the question, just yell out your answer. What's your favorite food? Go. Nachos. Sweet. All right. Now you may sit down. All right. Thank you. What's my favorite food? No, it is not what you think. It is not a mole. I've actually been a pescatarian for quite a while, vegetarian for 11 years. Mole actually, I think, embodies my journey, right? A rich blend of the beauty of my native Mexico and the culinary traditions of Europe. The Spaniards have a little relationship with Mexico there, right? And so, where is belonging when there are questions that shock you, right? And you would think, what's your favorite food? No one means anything by that. But I distinctly remember at some point, I quit saying mole. Not anymore, though. For a long time, I learned that the correct answer was pizza, nachos, hamburgers. Now, don't get me wrong, all of those are great, but they're not my favorite. They're not my favorite. Mole is, and don't give me that sweet mole. I want the good traditional, savory, spicy stuff going on. So I'm going to talk about just a few questions that come up that really make us question our own sense of belonging. Chad, you mentioned I became a Mexican, or in Arkansas in 1998. I also became a Mexican in 1998. And now that sounds so strange, right? Because I grew up in Mexico. I was born in Mexico, but I grew up in Escondido. And when I moved to Arkansas, I was 16 years old, and the first thing people would ask was, what's Mexico like? Good question, I don't know. I was undocumented until I was 19 years old. So even though I knew I was from Mexico, I couldn't go back. I had pictures, I could talk to people on the phone, but we didn't have FaceTime back then. So I was Mexican, but was I? My dad came for a quinceañera to Little Rock in May of 1998. So picture Arkansas in May. Beautiful, isn't it? On the 2nd of July, my parents put me on a Southwest flight with 4 of my siblings. I am 16 years old, and I'm responsible for 4 children ranging from 4 to 13. And if you've ever taken a cheap Southwest flight, it ain't direct, people. I got 4 little kids, a 13-year-old sister. I see some nods. I got a cooler full of cold cuts and a thermos full of flour tortillas and a lot of prayer, people. We finally make it to Little Rock, Arkansas. That plane lands. I looked this up. The humidity level was 98 degrees that day. My sister and I looked at each other, and I don't think we've ever felt more bonded. As we burst out crying. It was so horrible. We were like, they hate us. It was also the same year the Truman Show came out, so I knew the cameras were going to come out any moment, and I was going to be released from my torture. Forgive me. Arkansas is a great place. I would go nowhere else, but that was when I was 16. How I wish I were as smart as when I was 16. The other question I got asked often was, what are you? Not necessarily because of how I look. I'm something, right? But when people hear Lupe, or around Arkansas, Lupe, I would get a lot of, what are you? And I quickly learned that what they wanted to know is where I hailed from. But gradually I've come to identify as an Americanized Mexican. So crazy thankful for this great nation, but so proud of my roots. Because those roots are what keep me solid. Those roots are what keep me humble and grounded. Those roots are what keep me going back when it is not 98 degrees in humidity in the middle of December, handing out gifts at Angel Tree. And I could go on of what it's like to be an Americanized Mexican, but there's a few pros you might want to listen to instead. Oh.
They want us to play Mexico?
Dad, give him Monterrey, man.
Yeah, that would be so cool.
I'm not sure of that right now.
Come on, Dad.
Hey, Dad, you always said everything's a risk, right?
They don't accept us with it. They never have.
Hello, we're Mexican.
No, we are Mexican American, and they don't like Mexican
That's what I'm
American.
saying, boy.
And they can be mean, and they can tear us apart over there. Selena's Spanish is.
What about my Spanish? I've been singing in Spanish for 10 years. It's perfect.
Singing, yes, but when you speak it a little funny. And down there, you gotta speak perfectly, or the press will eat you up and spit you out alive. I've seen them do it.
Overreacting is usually.
Dad, the music will speak for itself, Dad.
Listen, being Mexican American is tough. Anglos jump all over you if you don't speak English perfectly. Mexicans jump all over you if you don't speak Spanish perfectly. We gotta be twice as perfect as anybody else. Why are you laughing? What's so funny?
Nothing.
I'm serious.
I know
Our
you're
family
serious,
has
Dad.
been here for centuries, and yet they treat us as if we just swam across the Rio Grande. I mean, we gotta know about John Wayne and Pedro Infante. We gotta know about Frank Sinatra and Agustin Lara. We gotta know about Oprah and Christina. Anglo food is too bland, and yet when we go to Mexico, we get the runs. Now that to me is Japanese Americans, Italian Americans, German Americans, their homeland is on the other side of the ocean. Ours is right next door, right over there. And we gotta prove to the Mexicans how Mexican we are, and we gotta prove to the Americans how American we are. We gotta be more Mexican than the Mexicans, and more American than the Americans, both at the same time. It's exhausting. Man, nobody knows how tough it is to be a Mexican American.
Well, Dad, you know, it's a good thing we have frijoles and tortillas to keep our strength up for the job.
Now you're me.
No, I'm not. A menudo.
Hey, menudo, hey.
Now you're making me hungry.
Come on, Dad.
They couldn't have said it better. And that's what it's like to be an Americanized Mexican. To be confident in your own skin, but to recognize that your journey is one of so many that are just as valuable as yours, and to not have to defend yourself to either side. So, in school, we ask questions to connect with our learners. Because when we connect as human beings, that's when we find those connecting passions, right? Those 10 seconds to just connect. So I've actually stolen a story from Georgina, that 13-year-old. This is just an indicator of what Georgina's like. You see all the dangles. She is still that va-va-voom. But Georgina shared with me a long time ago, and she doesn't even know I've included this story in here, so hey, Georgina. She said one day at school, her teacher asked, go home, talk to your parents, see how many cousins you have. So Georgina that day decided to do her homework because it was a topic she was interested in. So she shows up with her chart of how many cousins we have. And first, someone goes up, they have 5 cousins. Another one has 7. Someone has none. Okay. Then someone in the class has 25. And the whole class erupts and, oh my gosh, that's so many. That's almost too many. While everyone is doing that and the teacher's trying to calm them down, Georgina looks at her paper, folds it, and hides it. Between our both sides of the family, we have 204 first cousins. And be fruitful and multiply, Pena de Valadeses. All right. How did my sister feel in that moment? I haven't asked her if she lied about the answer. I know she didn't say 204. I don't know if she just pretended she hadn't done the homework. But I do know what my sister's eyes looked like retelling the story of not being able to belong when she had actually done the homework for once. By golly. So how do we build spaces that are safe for the adults and for the learners of our community? How do we do that so that the Georginas of the world won't have to worry that their answer doesn't fit the norm? The way we do that is by being someone's Mrs. Swinington. Just to point out, there's Georgina again, va-va-voom, can I say that? Mrs. Swinington. Even though I was born in Mexico, my parents' vision was that we would travel 2 years in Mexico, 2 years in California. We would go back and forth so that we would maintain our bilingualism and our roots. So I did study kindergarten in Mexico, all in Spanish. Then we moved back we lived on the Carlsbad racetrack. That's a whole nother story for another time. And I went to San Marcos, which had a bilingual program. So I went to school all day in Spanish. So even though I had grown up in the United States, all I knew was that English was only spoken during the racetrack races on the weekends. My whole world was in Spanish until my parents achieved the American dream and bought a little casita in Escondido, California. Had we lived 1 block over, I would have gone to Lincoln Elementary, but they didn't. They bought a house on Gamble Street. Imagine that. And I ended up with my siblings going to Conway Elementary, where we were the only 2 Latinos, to my recollection. And I distinctly remember that that's where I learned to say that my favorite food was a hot dog or a pizza. Because when I would show up with my burritos, they didn't look so good. Now, they were tasty people, but they didn't look so good. So I quickly learned that instead of facing those looks and those scowls from my peers, I would hide in the restroom. And I would eat my delicious burrito in the privacy of the stall. And I would just listen for the bell to ring. And when that bell rang, I would slip out, join the line, and go back to class. Well, one day, I didn't hear the bell. Imagine poor Mrs. Swinington. She's a first-year teacher, non-traditional. She waited till her kids were grown, and now she's lost the only Mexican kid. By golly, right? Well, that day changed my fate. Suddenly, instead of having to join all the kids, I was allowed to stay in the classroom. And in the classroom, what happened? I was able to help her prepare the packets, preview the material, so that I was prepared for the lesson to come later that day or the next. When I finished early for my tasks in the classroom, I could listen with I don't think it was using cassettes, people. It was the old 8-tracks, pretty neat. But I could listen through the headphones and get good oral input while I read the printed text, accelerating my English development because I could already read in Spanish. I just couldn't read in English yet. What else happened? My weird-looking food, the teachers didn't think it was weird. Suddenly there was value in me, in my belonging. Suddenly my mom would put in just a couple more tamales para las maestras. And more than that, I got to speak standard English. While at home, I maintained a solid foundation in my native tongue. All of those are great techniques for promoting academic excellence, and the cosmos just gifted them to me. But it's not enough to have a Mrs. Swinnington. What if we could create intentional belonging by creating a Grant Middle School experience? After Conway Elementary, I went to Grant Middle School. I'm not going to read everything they did, but I will highlight whose mouth is watering watching this. Mm-hmm. Who struggles in their school with fundraisers? Right? Who struggles with kids who don't want to have those lunches? Well, at Grant Middle School, they tapped into our cultures. And this is what they sold us for snacks. Brilliant, right? Great fundraisers, and man, that salsa was good, right? And so how do we, instead of making people conform to what we believe should be done, what happens when we listen to the community we have, not the one we wish we had, or the one we used to have? What if we listen and then answer with love? And answer with, it's going to be a win-win, baby. You get what you want, we increase funds. Or what about something from our friends in Knoxville, Tennessee? Los Potrillos. Their band program was suffering, not enough, so they started a mariachi group. Are the students still learning all the instruments? Yes. But now they're performing. And they interview a young man, if you look them up, and he says, I don't even speak Spanish, and everyone makes fun of me and my family. But when they watch me perform, I suddenly belong in both places. That is the power of belonging. But for me, I am blessed that belonging started in my community. This is me. Aww. The day I turned 2 years old at the Carlsbad racetrack. I have such admiration for my parents. My mom only made it to 2nd grade. My dad only studied to 5th grade. Not because they were not smart, but because life didn't give them the opportunities that they were determined for their kids to get. I said we lived at the racetrack. What I didn't point out when I first showed this picture is not until I was doing a session for a high school did I realize I grew up in a storage shed. We had no walls. These dressers and these sheets were our walls. I distinctly remember we used to have to walk out to use the facilities that the racetrack used. That's all we had. I don't share this for pity. I share it Look how much love, joy, and belonging starts here. We went from living in a shed to when my parents bought their house in Escondido. In the dead of night, at least once a week, my mom would come in our shared room where we had 3 bunk beds, because there's 6 of us, and she would wake me up, because I'm the eldest, the sacrifice. And she would wake me up and go, Lupita, muévete, mija, muévete, mija. And I knew she was waking me up because a stranger needed my bed for the night. Many times they were women in abusive relationships. They were people passing through. Regardless of their story, my parents' house was a safe home. And my mom would wake me up, and every time I would talk back, and every time my mother would respond, Lupita, es tu hermano o tu hermana en Cristo. Cállate y muévete. He or she is your sister in Christ. Get up and move. Thank you, Mother. And to this day, there's choices we could make where we could opt out of serving one another. But it is our responsibility to use the platforms and our voices, even if holding on to this microphone makes our voice shake just a little bit. It's all about human connection. And this is where I say thank you to my friend Amanda and my 7-year-old Emmanuel back there for choosing to be here, for making the trek, and to each of you, there's lots of things we can do. I invite you to listen to Nick and connect. Sometimes it's the one-on-one, but in another life, I'm the librarian. In my dream job, it's a librarian. We don't have to go through the discomfort of social connections that sometimes happen. We could read these great books, right? Jude, A.B., Skeeter, Minnie, Elsa. I've never been to Syria. I don't know much about Jackson, Mississippi, and I sure didn't live through the Dust Bowl in Texas. But when I read those books, I step into their circle. I walk in their shoes for a moment to grow in my human empathy. Books ain't you thing? We got this. Stories of humans who have lived pain, who have lived stereotypes. I've never been to Nigeria, but look up Chimamanda to be inspired. I'm not a Mennonite, but the tough decisions to do nothing, to stay, fight, and leave. To be an ally like August to people who may not have a voice without me. To each of you, life is so short. Share your story. Gracias.
So I have a lot of people to thank, and I'm going to try to keep it short. One, thank you all for coming on your Saturday. If you're like me, you were struggling not to know what the Hawk score was and crossing your fingers and praying that it was positive as you watch these lovely talks. Thank you to Chad Mira for giving up your Saturday to be with us. And finally to our speakers. You were dareful and you were risk takers today. Many of our speakers, this was their first time on stage. And our requirement was not that you had to be an amazing speaker. Our requirement was that you had to have courage. So come up on the stage and to share your story. So I'm a powerful believer that the truth shall set you free. We all can feel that education is shifting as it does as the pendulum swings. And I think our opportunity to share our stories from the student perspective, from the educator perspective, and from the college perspective are the way that we can get our truth out to find the right way in education. So I invite you all to join us at our rally this coming summer. It's in Jonesboro, Arkansas. We're going to put students on stage, much as we did today with educators, which is where some of our speakers today were inspired from. But we want to continue this conversation about education in all levels. So from the Office of Innovation for Education, thank you for coming and have a great evening.